Hi, welcome back. I hope everybody's doing well. Some of my most popular videos on my channel have been about bearings, which is quite a surprise in some respects, but in also others maybe not, because there seems to be an awful lot of perceived mystery around bearings and just so many questions and an equal amount of misinformation. Today's video is not specifically about bearings themselves, but actually about spacers. Some people may have never seen them, never used them, never even understand what they're for, and hopefully I can help you with that today. But also one of the main reasons for doing this video is to try and help people that are having trouble with spacers or even completely written them off as an option because they've had a problem. So let's get on with it. Okay, bearing spacers, they're these little tiny round cylinders that go inside your wheels between the two bearings. You may not have ever seen them before because they don't come with all sets of bearings. Some bearing companies supply them, some don't. Some simply don't seem to believe in them, and others think you should buy them separately. So they're kind of an enigma in themselves, in that you don't always get them and people don't always understand what they're for or why you'd even need them. In my humble opinion, you should always use spacers because they do serve a purpose and they work very well when used properly. The biggest problem that I think most people have with them is getting the right ones for your wheels and setting them up. And that can cause some frustration in itself, and is a good reason why a lot of people might just write them off and just say, I don't want them, I don't need them. I can put two bearings in my wheels and my wheels spin. That's all I need to know. Now I have a few different ones here, and I don't know whether you can see on the camera very well. But maybe you can see they are slightly different diameters. And they're not even always the same kind of length, which can be a big problem in itself. Now, I don't know whether you can see from that, whether you can notice the difference in length, but I'll do some close-up shots just to prove it, because you know, it's quite hard to focus on these and my face at the same time. But if we take a look up close, we have one here that is 10 millimeters diameter by 8.5-ish millimeters long. We have one that is 10.5, so 10.5 millimeters diameter and 10, maybe 0.25 millimeters long. And a third one here that is 12.5 millimeters diameter and 10 millimeters length. So three different spacers, three different lengths. So it's no wonder that people have trouble setting up the right ones, because the length and the diameters are both pretty important things. So just to demonstrate that, I'll start off with the diameters. And it's perhaps the most noticeable thing. If you look at a skateboard wheel, the center where the spacer will sit in the middle there, that is different on different wheels. So I have this Speed Lab wheel here, and if I take the largest spacer I have here, which is the 12.5 millimeter diameter, and place it in the center of the Speed Lab wheel, it's almost a snug fit. Hopefully you can see that. If I put a bit of light behind it, maybe it's a bit more apparent. You can just about see the glow of the light around the outside. So that's almost a snug fit inside the wheel. That's a bad thing. We want a lot of clearance for a spacer in the wheel core. The spacer must not touch the wheel core, otherwise it will grip it and squeak and slow you down. That's one problem that a lot of people have. So it's quite possible that you might have too large diameter for your wheels. Now a great example of that is with that same spacer and a Spitfire wheel. Now if I place that spacer in the Spitfire wheel, it's completely tight. It's so tight I can't even push it in. And so if these spacers were used on these Spitfire wheels, the wheels wouldn't even spin. They would be locked solid. And I've seen people online saying that they've put spacers in their wheels and suddenly their wheels are very slow. That's why the spacer is gripping the inside of the wheel. When we think about the way a bearing works, you have the axle of your truck. Now if I just remove the nut for a second and place a bearing on the axle and spin the bearing, it's the center of the bearing that needs to stay still, and it's the outside of the bearing that needs to rotate, because the outside of the bearing is fixed to your wheel. So the outside of the bearing is fixed to your wheel and the wheel rotates, and the inside of the bearing is fixed to the truck axle. And so that allows the wheel to rotate around the truck axle and the ball bearings inside to actually roll. Now some people don't do their truck nuts up very tight, and so to a certain amount the inside of the bearing is also spinning on the axle, and so you've got almost two places of movement, which some people use as a reason to not do their wheels up tight because they think that, you know, extra rotation is a good thing. But what you're actually doing is wearing out the inner part of the bearing on the axle, and that's going to wear the axle and prematurely wear your trucks down, and also wear the inside of the bearing out. And metal on metal is not good unlubricated either, and you don't generally oil or grease the axles. So it's not good to have the bearing rotating on the axle. The inside of the bearing needs to be pinched tight against the truck, and the outside of the bearing is obviously pinched tight against your wheel. So if you place a spacer in your wheel and then you put another bearing on top, really, because the inside of the bearing is being pinched tight against the axle when it's done up tight, and I'll just get a skate tool here just to pinch it up tight. So when you pinch up your wheel nuts properly tight, the bearings spin, but the center of the bearing and the spacer don't. They are being pinched very tight, and therefore you don't want your spacer to be in contact with your wheel because the spacer is pinched tight. So if your wheel is in contact with the spacer, it's going to slow down the wheel. It's going to act like a brake on the inside of the wheel and slow you down. So you need the right size spacers for your wheel. So if we go back to the example of the Spitfire wheel, that 12.5mm spacer being stuck hard in the center of that wheel is a really bad idea, because the wheel will be locked solid when we tighten up the truck nut. So if I remove that spacer from the Spitfire wheel and take one of the other spacers, and this time we will go with the 11mm spacer and put that inside the Spitfire wheel and take a look. Hopefully you might be able to see that there is now a gap. You see just around the outside of the spacer you can see light, and that means there is a gap. Now there's enough of a gap here. It's probably about a 2mm gap all the way around in this wheel, but it is enough to allow the wheel to rotate without the spacer touching the inner core of the wheel. So these 10.5 11mm spacers, these are good for these Spitfire wheels because they will not grip the inside of the wheel. Now if we look at some other wheels, so that Speed Lab wheel, you know, that'll take these smaller spacers just fine. You know, there can be a massive gap between the spacer and the wheel. That's not a problem. The bigger gap the better. So I would get the smallest diameter spacers you possibly can, and then you can't go wrong. If you get some that are a bit bigger, like these 12.5mm ones, which I actually think are originally designed for roller skates, so steer clear of these larger ones and just get the smallest ones possible. Another set of wheels here, these are mini logo bones, and again the hole, but you can see the gap there. So again, these mini logo wheels and these 10.5mm spacers, they're a good match. Another wheel here is a Santa Cruz slime ball, and these have a slightly different inner core, but as you can see, again, the gap is massive. So again, these 10.5-ish millimeter spacers are perfect for these slime balls. I also have a couple of Bones wheels. This one is a Bones STF, like Street Tech Formula wheel, and again, massive, great big gap. So the small one would be good. I'll just put the large one in there to show you that actually that is just fine as well. So there's a gap there. And then this one is an SPF wheel, a V5 SPF, and this much the same. There's a massive gap there for the large spacer, so there's going to be an even bigger gap for the small spacer. So bottom line is the small spacers win every time, so get the smallest diameter you can. That's the black one here. So that's the first issue. If you have wheels that feel like they're squeaking or slowing you down, you want to make sure that you've got the right size spacer and that there's plenty of gap between the spacer itself and the wheel core. The other important factor is actually the length. Now, if I go back to my measurements again, the smallest one I have here, I said already, I think, but this is 8.5mm long, which is quite short. This is the small spacer that suits the wheels best, so let's bear that in mind. The 12.5mm spacer is 10mm deep, so that's quite a chunk longer than the previous one. And then I think we have another one somewhere in between, which is 10mm long, so again, a bit different. Now really what effect the length has is when we look at the bearings that are placed upon the truck, it's this gap here that the length is dictating. Now why is that important? Well, when you put your bearings inside the core of the wheel, you can see that the core of the wheel has a seat for the bearing to sit in. And what's really important is that the length of the spacer is actually the same length or longer than the depth of the core. So what I'm going to do is use the end of my calipers here, my vernier calipers, just to measure the depth of these cores. So bear with me while I do that. Okay, that first one, that's the mini logo wheel. They are exactly 10mm deep. Let's go with the Speed Lab, which are exactly the same. They're 10mm deep. Let's go with the Spitfire. They are 10mm deep. Bones STF. They actually feel like a tiny bit more. Let's just double check. Right, they're 10mm, that's good. And the Bones SPF. They are actually about 9.25 deep. Let's just try the Santa Cruz. That's 9mm deep. So we have a range of 9 to 10mm deep. Okay, so what will happen if we use an 8.5mm long spacer in a 9 or 10mm deep core? They're gonna rattle around. And that's not good, because that means if they're not touching the bearings, if they're rattling around in between because they're not touching the bearings because they're being held apart from the spacer by the wheel core, the inner part of the bearing is never going to touch the spacer. Therefore, we need spacers that are more than 10mm long. That way the bearing will touch the spacer before the inner core of the wheel stops it from going any further when you tighten them down. You want the spacer tight against the inner ring of the bearing and the truck axle, and that's being tightened down by the nut, and that's what allows you to tighten the nut down as far as you possibly can and have the wheels still free spinning. Now I hope that kind of makes some sense. I know it's really hard to explain and get the idea across, but the bottom line is you need spacers that are a smaller diameter than the inner core of your wheel, with a decent sized gap around the outside, and also longer than the depth of your inner core, so that the bearings touch before the wheel stops the bearings from touching when you tighten the nut down. Now when you hear all of this, it's no wonder that people get confused or the wrong information, or just get fed up with trying to comprehend what's going on. Wheel manufacturers don't make it any easier. Bearing manufacturers certainly don't help, and there is no set standard for the size of bearing spacers or the size of the inner cores of wheels. It's just a minefield, and basically people get so fed up they just don't even bother using them. And of course there's always the people that say, I've been riding skateboards for so many years, I've never used spacers and I've never had a problem. Fine. That's absolutely fine, but you cannot deny when set up properly the bearings will run at their best. There's also the contingent that just say bearings are cheap, I don't care if I destroy them, I'll buy some new ones when they go that way. Again, that's fine, but when set up properly with a decent set of well-engineered bearings, they can last you years and years. There's no reason why they shouldn't. Okay, just to illustrate, and I've shown this quite a few times on my channel before, but you know, just for this video and to prove my point. So I've got my Spitfire Formula 4s and my Bones Swiss bearings and some spacers installed, and actually the bearings need a bit of a clean, so they make a bit of a noise, but they spin very well. There's nothing wrong with that. So, you know, they're not tight as in gripping inside the wheel and stopping from being spun, and you know, I could spin them really hard and they'll spin for plenty of time quite freely. And you know, that's no real gauge of how fast the bearings are by spinning like that, because they have to be under load to spin and get speed anyway, but it's just to show you that they're free spinning. And I've got my skate tool here, and just to sort of prove that the nuts, they are done up as tight as they will go, and they're free spinning. So you know, those people that can't tighten their nuts right up because they don't have spacers in there, and this is proving that point that I was saying, where the nut is squashing down on the inner core of the bearing, which is then squashing down on the spacer against the inner core of the second bearing, and then down against the truck axle itself. So all of that center line of the two inner cores of the bearings and the spacer between them, and then you've got the truck hanger and the nut, all of that center line is all tight. Nothing is rotating there. The only thing that is rotating are the ball bearings inside the bearing race, which allows the wheel to rotate. So that's just to highlight exactly what is going on with my wheels. And I'll just take them apart to show you, just to prove the point. So let me loosen that nut off. I need to clean my bearings anyway, so they've got to come off. So there's that nut. There's my first speed washer. And the speed washers are super important as well, because they allow the nut to sit on the inner ring of the bearing quite flat and nice. You don't necessarily want to put the nut straight down on the center core of the bearing. You can, but it's always better to have a washer on there. So I take the wheel off, and there's another speed washer on the axle there, just to be a flat mounting point on the axle, because the axles aren't always 100% flat, so you put a washer on there and then it at least makes it flatter. So there's that, and I just pop my bearings out, just twist it off the axle there, and there you go, spacer dropped out. But there's one Bones Swiss, these are the big ball Swiss bearings, so that's one bearing, and the spacer, and then there's another bearing inside. So I could put them back on in reverse and tighten them up and just show you that you know, there's nothing weird going on. I'm not making things up. This is how they are, you know. So bearing on, spacer on, wheel on, nice and tight, seat it properly, speed washer, put the nut on and tighten them down, tighten the nut down as far as it will go, fully tight. That's it, fully tight, and it spins. So that's exactly, and then it spins. You just make sure that they're properly home. There you go. Spins perfectly. So yeah, just need to give them a clean to stop that rattling, but there's no lateral movement. They don't rattle backwards and forwards. So they're as tight as they'll go. And that's how a properly set up wheel with bearing spacers in is supposed to be. Anyway, I appreciate that's a hell of a lot of very geeky information to try and absorb, and it just may be not even worth your time trying to deal with it, which is fine, but I've not seen another video online that attempts to explain this, so I thought I'd do this video just to explain, and at least there's some information out there. If you found it useful or interesting, let me know in the comments. If you've got any questions, again, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to help people who are struggling or need to know some more information. Until next time, thanks for watching, take care, do me a favour, just leave a like if you found it useful, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.